Are the leadership class and the creative class in the economy chess pieces for the financier class? And I'm trying to develop different and creative ways of thinking about the economy. So when I talk about the leadership class and the creative class, I'm kind of clumping these classes together, where these are basically coveted positions in society of agency and leadership, like CEOs and owners of startup companies. But it also includes artists and filmmakers and scientists who are funded by some group of people, that is the financier class, who is creating those positions, funding those positions, and deciding who gets to move into those really coveted positions of agency and creativity and positions where you can make beautiful things happen in the world. And I guess I should say, when I say artists, I'm not talking about all artists. I'm talking about artists who actually embody funded positions where they are being paid to do their artwork. So on the street artists that don't get funded, that's not part of this class that I'm talking about. And of course, the financier class involves bankers and other people who fund startups. It involves government workers who decide which contractors get huge contracts from the government, which scientists get funded, get grants. The financiers are essentially like gardeners, where if we think of the economy as a garden, where the garden could have one type of flower like poppies or morning glories or marigolds, and they get to select which of those flowers get planted, which get to grow and thrive, which get fertilized, which ones get weeded and cleared space for, and which ones get taken out or moved to some other section. So a positive version of the financier role is the gardener of the economy, where they sort of structure that garden. And that, of course, can be done in a really beautiful, meaningful way. But it can also be done in a very strategic way, basically using these creative class and leadership class roles as chess pieces for accomplishing the personal goals of the financiers. So I would like to flesh out the notion of the financier as the chess player and think about what is this chess game they're playing with these people and the people underneath them. And I want to ask, what is that game? Like, what is the nature of that particular game? And to do this, I kind of want to think about there being 4 different classes of people in society. The first 2 I've already set up. That's the financier class, the gardeners of the economy. There's the lucky creative class and leadership class, including startups and scientists and researchers. And then below them, we have the middle management class. And below them, we have the working class. So those are the 4 classes that I see. And I got the idea for this when I was reading the book Bullshit Jobs, which basically goes through different types of jobs that are completely useless in society. And I will talk more about that book in another video. But one of the things that the author pointed out was that if you look at payment in jobs, oftentimes the most meaningless, bullshitty jobs are jobs that are actually somewhat well paid compared to working class jobs that are inherently meaningful. At least many of them are. Like if you're a plumber or if you're a construction worker or a home health worker, all of those job types, there's inherently meaning in what you do. Like you can see, yes, I am creating value with my hands. I am cutting someone's hair and I see the value that I'm creating. And those are the low-paid jobs. Whereas these middle-level jobs, which are often middle management types of jobs, sometimes you're just in that role to make the person above you feel important. Sometimes you're doing something super meaningless and useless in the economy, but they've created the job inside the system. And I got to thinking about these jobs in terms of how money motivates and moves people inside an economy. Because money itself is a secondary motivator. And a lot of times people will take huge salary cuts to work in a job that feels more meaningful In fact, the reason they have to pay these bullshit job types of workers so much is because there is high turnover. It's just kind of soul-sucking to be in one of those situations. So people want to work in a place where they have agency and they can exercise their own sort of creative power and control. And so when I thought about these 4 categories of jobs, really the separation was, where do you get your sense of agency and meaning and empowerment in the world? And for working class people, oftentimes their main source of agency is outside the workplace, such as their family or their church or their garden, like their physical garden. And those people can find meaning and find that's their place to express their own creativity in the world. And their jobs, they may also get some value because it does feel meaningful in some way for some of those workers. On the other hand, if we look at the middle management class, I think there is a variety of motivational forces where sometimes it's just money, where money can be invested in something they care about, something that's creative and beautiful outside of work for many of that class. But for other people in that class, they're sort of motivated by the hopes of moving up into the next class, like moving up into the leadership class or the creative class, where they can exercise some kind of meaningful power in the world. And they know that if they move up in the organization, that opportunity is available to them. Now, for the leadership class and the creative class, oftentimes just being in that role is the main motivator. Like they're a filmmaker and they get to make films that just inspire them as something to do on a regular basis. Or scientists who want to do their science and they want that agency over their little lab and their curiosity, like they want to explore. And so this is sort of a positive version of power where you have the power to make your vision into reality. And of course, for leaders like CEOs, it's more that their best form of power in the world is a relational type of power in wielding power within a community to bring people together, to do great things. So being in that role is sort of the reward in and of itself. Although, of course, those people are well paid because in some ways the salary is like a validation on how important your role is in society. And I think that's one of the things the financier class uses to make sure that the people in those classes, that is the leadership and the creative classes, are thriving and that they have the resources they need to make their vision happen. Now, the question is, how does this financier game work? Like, how does the chess piece game work? What sort of levers do they need to pull to play that game? And we might look first at the theory, like what in theory do some economists think that they do? And some economists will think, okay, the financier class is really just trying to maximize profit at all levels, and it's that maximization of profit is independent of their own hopes and values and visions for the economy and the world. And if that were the case, in theory, they should be responding to the needs of the population. And I do think some of this is absolutely going on, where the financier class does have to keep a heartbeat on what kinds of things sell, what kinds of things will be, what kinds of art events and theater events will be attended. So they do have to sort of listen to people lower down on them than on the hierarchy. And that's sort of one form of accountability in terms of these financiers as the gardeners of the economy. However, there's a couple of caveats there. And one of the caveats, of course, is just money. It's that if you're keeping a heartbeat on what will make money, well, if you look at the bottom 20% of the income distribution, those people have such a small share of the money that you don't need to pay that much attention to that group if you want to maximize profit. Like, you kind of want to pay a lot more attention to the people who are just below you, who are at the 90th percentile of the income distribution, because that's where most of the money can come from. So what I would call the attunement of the financiers to the needs of the economy, that attunement is maldistributed to begin with. But if we're talking about playing this game, part of the game is sort of listening to the needs and listening to the hopes of the population. But, of course, for a lot of these people, they don't just care about money. Because, of course, money is a secondary motivator. A lot of times what they care about is their own vision, which could be super altruistic and well in touch with what would be a beautiful vision of the future, or it could be a little bit geared toward the accumulation of power on their behalf. There's lots of different personal visions that the financiers can have. Now, strategically for these people, if the main avenues of shaping the economy are financing these amazing creative class and leadership class roles, then the financiers may want as much control as possible over as many roles like that as possible. And I think one of the ways that they can control that is by controlling who gets into those positions to make sure the person in those positions has the same vision and hopes as the financiers themselves. Now, there's a natural attunement not only of the creative class and leadership class, but also of the middle management class to the hopes and dreams and visions of the financier class. Because anyone in the middle management class wanting to move up is not going to move up unless they actually embody what the financiers envision. So if you're going to be successful in that game, you need to be very attuned to the financiers. Also, having control means if someone in the creative class or the leadership class did something that the financiers didn't like, you need ways of getting them out of their position, moving someone better into that position somewhat quickly, because that ability to switch out people from those roles is important for maintaining control over the economy and the positions. Another strategic element here for the financier class is recognizing what types of leadership positions would be most powerful, like what types will influence more people, what types will amass more power in the future, what types of creative class people will reach the hearts and souls of the people they're creating art for. So it's really keeping in touch with not only the needs of the population to serve them through the economy, but also the channels of power where one's hopes and dreams, which could be good or bad, can effectively influence the broader economy. So that's a second element of strategic behavior, is really figuring out where the power lies in an economy. And then a third strategic element of this game of chess with people and with jobs is going to be collusion, essentially, with other financiers who may have interests that align with one. It's sort of like if you can get 2 or 3 players who are all very powerful people in their own right in terms of the banking world or the government financing world. In that case, collaboration between these groups can actually very much amass power to the groups collaborating. Now, one last thing about is this good or bad? And I think obviously it's going to be both. But I think with a lot of the financier class and thinking of them as gardeners, creating the garden of the economy, they do have positive visions, they do have hopes and dreams that they're trying to bring into reality by shaping the economy. But when that goes wrong, it doesn't tend to be because they're, evil and conniving behind the scenes. My own view of this is it tends to be that there's an imbalance and salience between their hopes and dreams and their vision and the negative side effects that happen on the side. In fact, people tend to get really hostile when anyone suggests that there's negative side effects to their own choices and behavior. So when people rise up and start to say, hey, what you're doing, what you're financing is actually causing some harm to people or to the environment or whatnot, there does tend to be a hostile reaction to that group. And that's sort of where some of this can go wrong, is when there's no form of accountability on the financiers themselves. Now, if we're talking about accountability, I think many of the financiers are accountable, because if they just invest in their own pet projects without thinking about a return in the future, then that may minimize their ability to invest in more such projects in the future. So the game they're playing is a long game, and if they're trying to keep their power and keep their ability to be the gardeners of the economy, then they do need to make sure, okay, people are going to buy some of the stuff we're creating. People will watch the films that we're investing in. But there is a lot of room for their own creativity and vision. And the question at least I have is there a way of making the financier class more democratically accountable across the board? Because even the government people who are underneath an elected government, we all kind of know there's a bottleneck of accountability where elections oftentimes are about 1 or 2 or maybe 10 issues. But they're not about all of the things that get financed, and there's not necessarily currently a great way for the population to weigh in on the negative side effects of the chess game played by the financier class.